So please welcome Kate Rose to the show. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much, Ashley. It's so wonderful to be able to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for these knowledge that I've learned from reading your new book, learning about your story, and looking at relationships in a different way. And I'm 55,
Mhm.
and you've really made me go through my life in each relationship and understanding each lesson and what I needed to learn. And it just opens up, like I'm thinking, why would I choose that relationship? And then you describe, like, well, because you had these wounds and you had this,
Mhm.
it's like so fascinating. So thank you. And I've sent your book to many of my friends and your
Thank you.
podcast, which is I love it. I listen to every episode, by the way.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so
Soul gold.
much.
I
Yes.
do my rabbit hole research. And so anyway, what I'd like to do to begin to show everybody your journey and really why what kind of, I look at your life and as a soul, right? Like
Mhm.
you came to this earth to experience this and then share this knowledge with everyone and have that first relationship kind of open your eyes to like, oh my gosh, that was
Yes.
a gift, right? Like everything
Mhm.
in our life is a gift. And I have taught my girls, and you have two girls too, similar
Mhm.
ages.
I love that.
Um, but I've taught them their whole life, like everything is for you. There's nothing
Absolutely.
ever wrong or bad or there's no mistakes. Everything is always that way. And I know you think that way after reading your
Mhm.
book. So let's go down, even listening to your childhood and as an only child, my husband's an only child, and trying to understand that too from your perspective of being an only child. I have two sisters. I'm the oldest, but it's like even thinking of how he navigated through his
Oh.
relationships as a single, as an only child. But let's go back to that moment. I know there's many moments because I could tell you right now, there's one when you were 7 with your dog.
Mhm.
There's one like the way with that day you put that thing out on Facebook. So you take me to I always say when you uncovered your magic, but
Mhm.
just take us down the Kate Rose journey.
The Kate Rose journey. Well, even like you had said, being an only child really does, just as any birth order, but I think especially an only child because there's so much time that you have. Even if you have friends, there's so much time that you have to yourself to reflect, to think, to kind of be in your own space that if you have siblings coming in or out or vying for attention or even just loudness in the home that you might not get otherwise. For me, let's say how I describe it is I feel like at an early age I did feel different, or that kind of awoke in me that there was something. I saw the world maybe in a different way. But like so many people, I had lost that. I kind of packaged it up or boxed it away and did my life. I did all of the things I was supposed to in the way that you were supposed to. And so it really wasn't until I got divorced from my first love, my soulmate, and I was plunged into this world of single motherhood. I had always wanted to be a writer. I was always drawn to do it. I did it in my free time. And I literally woke up one day and I truly think it was the universe being like, this is what you need to write. This is what you need to say. And I did, and it was published. And from then on, it was that moment. And I think that, even uncovering, unlocking that magic or realizing who you are for me really began with kind of opening that box back up and realizing that maybe I wasn't discovering someone new or a new life, but something that had been within me the whole time.
Right. So your first book, you only fall in love 3 times. Okay. So of course that's a that title right there draws you into like, what? And now that I understand it and understand the 3 phases, will you explain, because that was a magical, explain that too before we go into the 3 ways you fall in love, how you put it out there and you woke up the next morning and you're like, oh my gosh.
It was
wildfire.
incredible. I mean, again, I was in the midst of single motherhood at the time. I believe this was back in maybe 2015, 2016. I literally had just any other Wednesday evening, I had made dinner for my daughters, as you have, I'm sure, a million times, and cleaned up, and we were all on the couch. Mine were still younger. So I had young children climbing on top of me, and I was like, oh, I had an idea to write something. And so I literally just did it in the notes section of my phone and posted it. I think, of course, while a Disney movie was probably playing on the television in front of me. And I woke up the next morning and it was, I mean, 12 hours, maybe not even. And there was over like 100,000 people following me on Facebook, and it had gone viral. And it was amazing, but it was also really, I think, in that moment where I realized the power of words, and not to second guess ourselves as far as what we're thinking or what we're feeling, any sort of energy or project that we want to put out into the universe, because you might not be certain why it has to happen. But I do believe that we get these ideas and nothing is random.
Right. So go to that. So you're sitting on the couch with your girls,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm right there with you watching a Disney movie. And all
Yep.
of a sudden, this light bulb comes on, and you're thinking, you only fall in love 3 times. That just came into your mind.
It literally just came into my mind. And I think a big part of it is, again, for me, I mean, and as I tell even people that I work with, I write what I do because of what I've experienced. My life has been far from perfect. I mean, even this, the stories that you mentioned in the book, there was, I was an only child. My biological father was schizophrenic. My mother got remarried. It was immense, with so many different experiences and wounds. And so I was sitting on the couch and I started thinking again about my own life, trying to figure out, okay, what's going on here more than anything else? Why is this happening? And then I started thinking about people that I'd spoken to. I started thinking about men I had been with. I started thinking about my friends, and I was like, okay, there really does seem to be three categories here, three types of love that we all go into. And even at that point, I truly did believe, and still do, that we attract these loves as lessons for ourselves. That as much as even that karmic one, which can be come across as being incredibly painful, it still is for our highest good. And so I wrote that more of the way to help people understand, one, that the love that they truly want and crave does exist, but it doesn't mean that everything that happened before it was a mistake. It was something
Right.
that helped shape you and make you who you are for that amazing love.
Right. So what it did for me, like I said earlier, is I went down my my path, right? Like, okay, I'm trying to do this timeline, and I'm learning from you because I really want you to explain the three: the soulmate, the
Mhm.
karmic, and the twin flame. And you explain the twin flame as like this. Well, I look at it because I feel like I am in my what a
Mhm.
soft era. I
Yeah,
was
I
thinking
love
of like
that.
Taylor Swift, my soft era.
It
um,
is. We should all strive to be in a soft era.
yes, and I do,
Truthfully.
and I am in that, and it's so cool to read that and to confirm that and how I feel
Mhm.
about my marriage. But boy, it's so cool to the way you describe a soulmate and why you have that relationship, and then when you move into the karmic one and why you have that and what comes out of that and what you're healing and the wounds and the
Mhm.
all the generational healing that you go
Yes.
through. And it just, I think for people, and why I'm so excited to share you, is we go through life, and I always say blinders, but you kind of just you like even raising girls, right?
Mhm.
Like now at
Absolutely.
my Paige is, 18 in college, and they both really haven't had boyfriends, but
Mhm.
in your mind, now that you've gone through what you do and you do what you do, I'm sure you parent in a way to try to provide them as much like stability in going to who they're
Absolutely.
choosing, right? The awareness. So explain the soulmate, and then let's go into each little one. And I have little questions just to kind of spark something out so people understand. It's just going to give people a clarity about, every relationship is perfect. Everything
Mhm.
in your life is perfect. I always say that, but just to give more
It is.
clarity on that.
Well, the first love is what we call our soulmate. And many times that can be in high school, college, it can even be that early first love. And the soulmate really is someone that is everything that kind of you were taught, you were conditioned that you as a child thought love would be. Many times there's similar backgrounds present. They might be from a similar area. Parents might be friends of soulmates. And the soulmate comes in, and that's the one where we're like, okay, we've been dating for 3 years, or now we're a year after college, we should get engaged. And then we're like, okay, so now that we're engaged, we need to get a house. And once we get a house, well, then we have to have babies because that's what you do. And so we progressed through this soulmate relationship. And then suddenly we realize, we start wondering, okay, I've done everything on this, checklist for life, and I'm only 30. What does that mean for the
Right.
rest of my life? And I think so many of us has those moments. And in that situation, we're able to realize that there might not be anything quote unquote wrong with the soulmate, but it doesn't mean that that's actually right either. And so, as much as we could make that conscious choice to stay in our soulmate relationship, which in my research often is what many of our grandparents and great grandparents did,
Right.
they married their soulmate and they stayed with them for the next 60 years. But to make the choice to leave your soulmate, to transition out of that relationship, is to also make that choice to really dive deep into your authentic journey. Who are you meant to become? What is your inner truth? And so that aspect of what is your truth for yourself, your soul, your life path, that's what becomes the most important aspect with the soulmate relationship, because we can carry on with the soulmate, but we can't carry on in something that looks so good as we were trained and kind of conditioned to choose, and still be able to identify our truth at the same time.
Right. So so what I'm understanding with the soulmate, like our grandparents, like they stayed married,
Mhm.
if they didn't get along, they'd sleep in different rooms, or it
Yeah,
was
that's what
just
my grandmother even told me. I asked her at one point, I was like, have we really like messed up love? Like, she's like, no. She's like, I knew lots of men who moved out to the garage on a cot. I'm like, okay, I guess that makes us feel a little better.
right. But so then you look at that when I'm listening to you. So the growth of the soul doesn't really evolve in the soulmate relationship.
No.
And with you, you married at you married your high school right
Mhm.
out of high school.
Yeah.
Did the whole thing that you just described, had the babies, got the
Mhm.
house, and then said, oh, geez, what, now what? Right. Like I did it
Mhm.
all. So you
Exactly.
have that experience of the soulmate and then getting stuck and saying, oh, no, this is not for my highest growth. So for me, I was like dating in my 20s. I didn't marry Richard till I was 36 and got married when I was 30 to someone for a year. But
Mm.
so that was that was a karmic, so
Oh,
I understand
joy.
that, that was so, but it kind of gives you that, I don't know, not acknowledgement, but like, it's okay. Like we do
Yeah,
all those
it's
things
it's
to,
like that inner validation almost, that like we really
yes,
have been on the path even if we doubted it at times.
exactly. Okay. So continue. So now that we've understood like soulmate would be a mirror of us, like, right?
Mhm.
Like it's someone that mirrors you.
Mirrors us at that stage of life, because I
Right.
always say each relationship really does mirror where we're at in life. It just depends on where we are. So as a soulmate, we are younger. We're in our late teens, 20s, maybe even early 30s, depending on people's journey, but we're still kind of living as we were taught to be in childhood. We're living according to what we were supposed to do, the, obligations or the desires of others. And so we attract a relationship that's very similar to that. When we choose to transition out of the soulmate, at that point, we're like, okay, usually most of us we want a passionate love. We want something, we want the twin flame, but we want something that's passionate, that we can't get enough of each other. We want sparks and fire, and just we want to feel alive. And so we unknowingly end up attracting our karmic partner. And our karmic partner, what it fascinates me, and why Written in the Stars kind of was written, is because the idea of our karmic partner, it really is like the perfect combination of whatever we need to heal from our childhood wounds, whether it's abandonment, whether it's emotional unavailability, not feeling chosen or worthy, or being the protector, whatever it might be. And so we will attract this karmic partner. Of course, we don't know this. And there's so much passion, so much chemistry. we continue to try over and over again to make this relationship work. And the pattern with the karmic never actually changes. It never actually gets better. It never, let's say, fuses into a real relationship, or the person doesn't come healthy, whatever particular situation it is. It's just a cycle that continues until we are ready to realize and ultimately choose ourselves. And by choosing ourselves in that sense, we're also able to give ourselves what our inner child never received. And that's what helps transition us out of the karmic relationship.
Right. So explain that, gosh, the story about the dog, because I have two golden retrievers. And
Ah,
when I was
so
listening to
you
your
understand.
story, yes. So when I was listening to your story when you were 7, and I was like going down to the ice, the lake to
Mhm,
ice skate, and your mom tells you to bring the dog because he's protecting. So
mhm.
that helps understand, like, explain that story.
So the story that you're mentioning, obviously, in the book, I was talking about a lot of my own experiences in inner child wounds. And I was raised at this point. My mother didn't remarry until I was 12. And so, with my biological father being schizophrenic, he did not know who I was majority of my childhood. So I would have to be introduced to him. I wasn't that he didn't care or that there was any sort of choice to be made. It was just he was not able to be there. And so, because of that, and my mom being a single mom at that time, working long hours, I was responsible already at a very early age, starting dinner, taking care of the animals, the pets that we had. And I didn't, of course, know this until much later, but I didn't feel like I had that protector. And so whenever I did go outside of the story referring to, it was winter and I was ice skating at the little pond across the street. And whenever I left, whenever I did something, she would tell me to take Mishka, which is my dog, to protect me. And this particular day, we were coming back and he chased a squirrel and ended up impaling himself on a stick. And it was incredibly traumatic in that moment, my pet. But it wasn't until years later when I was doing a cacao ceremony did I really realize that it was really a metaphor for someone, something that was supposed to protect me, needing my protection.
Right.
And so that was something that was a theme that I ended up carrying over. I would be attracted to these incredibly masculine looking men who looked like they were larger, they were bigger than me. My inner child was like, of course these men can protect you. But yet I ended up doing that for them. And so again, it's that same awareness where I had no idea that I was seeking this, but because of my past experience, because of my childhood, I was also seeking men who I would become their protector.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that was such a great way. I really learned through that story. I was there, and then you talked about the stick through the lung and the
Oh
blood,
God,
and I
it
was
was,
like,
I
oh
know, and it's winter
no.
time up here in the Northeast and it was on the snow. It
Yeah.
was it was truly, and I knew that it was a traumatic experience, but it wasn't until I was in that cacao ceremony and kind of in that meditation and I was crying. Like I had tears, my face was just wet. I had tears streaming down my cheeks, my eyes were closed because I realized in that moment how profound that was. Because, of course, I would have loved to have my father be my protector. And most of us, even if we have mothers who are, we still crave that masculine presence.
Right.
And so, but in that moment, not only did I feel unprotected, but I realized that I had to become kind of the protector. And so that was that energy that I took on for a really long time and never was able to connect those dots. And that really has been my purpose. That's what I've desired to do for others because I feel like if we can connect those dots for ourselves and realize why we're in, repetitive romantic cycles or why we're dating the same partner or just feeling really unfulfilled, then we can make the choice to heal, to give ourselves what we need, and then we could start attracting happier, healthy relationships.
Right.
And I mean, how amazing would it be if we all think about either whether ourselves or our friends and family if we were no longer in all of these cycles that we know are so painful.
Oh, so true. So when I, in part, and one, a little bit of your book, what caught my attention was you could be going through a karmic lesson or, uh, wound healing,
Mm-hmm.
but your partner that you're choosing to be in at that time could not be like right? Explain how that works.
So, depending on the connection and again, the purpose for each of it, many times people have asked me, well, if it's karmic for me, does it mean it's karmic for them? Because, everybody's kind of hoping eventually at some point that the karmic will come together. But the idea is that just because you're having your own personal journey doesn't mean that your romantic partner at the time is having the same. They could be going through a different type of connection. They could look at you more as a soulmate. That could be their purpose. They could be thinking that you might be their romantic destiny, their twin flame, when in reality, for you, it's an incredibly painful relationship that's only meant to heal. And again, though, that's where so much of that self journey becomes important, because as long as we're kind of more focusing on others or what they're feeling or their perception or their wounds, we're going to still end up neglecting our own.
Right.
So almost even having those relationships be out of balance or for different lessons continues to really emphasize the importance that we have to place on the self in the relationship.
And is it addicting? Is that what you would describe a karmic
Oh, the
relationship?
karmic is addicting. And most of the time, when I speak with people, they do think that their karmic is their twin flame. But they describe this feeling as, I can't live without them. I can't breathe when they're not there. I've tried ending it, but we only end up back together. And so that feeling where it literally feels like your life would be over if you were not together, that's the karmic, because that feeling is created by the inner child saying, but I want this person to give me what I've always needed. I want this person to make me feel loved. And so that feeling of just life will be over if this relationship doesn't exist, that even lets us know that it is that karmic relationship and not necessarily a healthier one.
Right. So when I was mentioning earlier that I was married for a year, I know that was that was a karmic relationship. I could check all the boxes when I was going
Oh,
through it. So that was really, but so let's say I wasn't strong enough to leave that and I continued down that path and I'm still on that path with him and I didn't leave. Am I destined to go? How does that, the soulmate lesson you say, like your grandparents say, sleep in a
yep.
cot in the garage. And now, like with the karmic lesson, if I hadn't, made up my mind that it wasn't working and I needed to continue to find my twin flame, um, how would that look?
So the longest that I've seen someone kind of be enmeshed within that karmic lesson is a little over 20 years. On the shorter side, usually they run no less than like 5 years or so with dating and marriage, but however it might play out. The karmic relationship is a huge portion of our life.
Okay.
But the reality is that for mostly everyone, I mean, we do have that choice. And I always will tell people, because I never advocate and never say you have to break up or you must break up, because we have to listen to ourselves. So it's just acknowledging, obviously depending on the behaviors, if it's, quite abusive or quite unhealthy, there, with addictive diseases, there might be more to it. But predominantly it's realizing and coming to that place of acceptance that this relationship will never be anything more than what it is now. It's never going to be that dream that we have of love in our minds. Most people I do see eventually do transition out of their karmic relationship, whether it's only after a year of marriage in your case, which even I'm sure with everything that you went through is still a blessing that it wasn't 10 or 20.
Right.
But the reality is, it's no matter how long the journey takes us, we do have the choice to make. And for most people, even let's say we have children with our karmic partner, maybe it's a matter of the children getting older or being able to be financially, secure enough to support ourselves. But a life solely with a karmic partner, if no other choice is made, that's one that would be incredibly painful and unhealthy.
Right.
Not just in the soulmate sense of not identifying your truth, but truly likely being around toxic behaviors for a long period of your life.
And I mean, to me, that is like dis-ease,
Yeah.
right? Like I
And
just
oh,
see,
and that's the phrase in my head all the time with that.
yes, that's what
Mhm.
comes to me when you say that, because I can just see someone sticking with that. And it's just a dis-ease in their body. And it just creates so much everything, right? Like this disturbance of your soul's pure essence.
Well, and not to mention, if there are children present, then we are not the generational healers. That means that that would be tasked with our children. Because if our
Right.
children grew up in that household, continually witnessing that, whatever it was, whether it was just emotional unavailability or pure toxicity and abuse, our children would then be tasked with that lesson.
Right.
And not only does it obviously create for a very unfulfilling, painful, chaotic, drama filled life, but that also means that our soul isn't evolving past that point.
Right. Okay.
So that means that we are kind of stuck in this space of saying, okay, my inner child, I am not worthy of what I deserve. I'm not worthy of what I dream of. And so being stuck in the karmic is really being stuck in your childhood wounds, not feeling, not knowing how much you're actually worth.
Okay. I have a friend that you're describing, and she
Oh.
listens to this. So I'm just going to bring this up. So, um, and she was one of them that I sent
Mm.
your podcast to. There was an episode that's the emotional intelligence one.
Yes,
And
yes,
that's a
thank you.
great lesson for parenting too, that I want to talk about,
Absolutely.
right? And it made me realize, am I asking my kids? But okay, hold on. I get too excited. So when I see what you're just saying, when you stay in a karmic relationship and you're have these little children that are watching it this whole
Mhm,
time, right?
mhm.
You're not stopping the generation. You're
You just
continuing
continue.
that line, and they're just going to continue because they do what they see, not what
Mhm.
they hear, right? They're going to
Exactly.
all do what they watch. So to get someone, so if that was your client, what do you do to get that to get her to say, okay, let's go. I need to break this off. How do you do that?
The first thing is that person really aware that the relationship they're in is indicative of their childhood wounds? And so it's asking them, have you experienced similar themes in past relationships or in your childhood? What are you trying to achieve in this relationship, or what are you trying to get? What is your hope? And of course, what is it that you're afraid of? Some women genuinely, or people in general, are afraid of, I'm going to fail. I'll be broke. No one will love me anymore. I'll be single the rest of my life. That's something we all tell ourselves, even though it's not true. Um, so the more that we can get to, is that person truly consciously aware of the pattern that's playing out in their life? And then really going more deeply into the fears, that's going to unearth the worthiness. And it is a process. It's not something that we can kind of sort through in a week and sometimes even a few years, because to really go into it means that we do have to be willing to explore the fact that this relationship, maybe even this life that we created, was all a product of our inner child trying to have something or achieve something that they never were able to experience. And so, even in looking at saying, okay, well, we know we're in an unhealthy relationship, or we know that this is one that ideally we would like to get out of, but we can't go there as of yet, it becomes looking at and saying, okay, what are the needs that you feel are not being met on a daily, weekly basis? Whether it's, are you having, words of affirmation spoken to you? Are you feeling, touched? Are you feeling closeness? Are you feeling worthy? Is your partner making you feel validated? And it really begins with kind of even just saying, okay, today I'm going to focus on building myself up. I'm going to validate my thoughts and dreams. I'm going to listen to myself. And sometimes even just beginning in such a small place of learning to kind of take care of whatever we need on that particular day is enough to have us start realizing that maybe there's a lot of other needs that really aren't being attended to, and being able to figure out why that is.
Yeah. You know what it sparks in my mind is my belief, and I'm sure it's yours too, is,
Mm.
we have this soul contract or family,
Yes.
to grow and evolve, right? That we plan these events, we plan these relationships
Mhm.
to heal, to expand in our soul's journey. But when you understand it in the way you describe, it's like, okay, it's like, okay, I've learned that lesson.
Mhm.
And I know it's easy for me to say and like to people that are like, well, I can't get out of this. But it's like that the way you describe moving on to the next phase and clearing out these wounds, um, and like what expressing that, like understanding what you're clearing, right? Like,
Exactly, because we can't leave the karmic relationship. And this is why many times it's off and again and on again so much, is that we might know it's unhealthy. We might know that it's not okay, or we're dating an emotionally unavailable man, or someone who's married. We might know that all of these things logically are not a good idea, that they're not healthy. But until we actually realize that it's our inner child that's looking to be chosen, that's looking to be loved, that's looking to be protected or validated, that pattern's going to keep continuing. So by really kind of leaning in and trying to draw those connections, and it doesn't always have to be from the father in childhood. It could absolutely be from the mother. It could be from the dynamic of your father leaving your mother, even if he was there for you. There's so many different nuances and ways that it can come across. But the more that we can get to the root of it, which is what I kind of always say, then the more we're able to actually address it, because we're not going to be able to cut ties with our karmic partner as long as we don't really know why was it that we were choosing this? Why did we think that this is what we deserved?
And that is how you cut it.
Mhm. Exactly.
And that's when they come to you and say, Kate, help me cut this and move on.
Yes. And it is in those moments, as much as I have heard so many painful, sad, heartbreaking stories, I actually get excited when people reach out, because to me, it always means that they're ready for that level of truth.
Right.
They're ready, even if they're a little hesitant. And there's even a woman I spoke to recently, and I had first spoken to her in the spring. And this time she reached out. She's like, I really want to know. I need more clarity. And she even remarked, she's like, you told me a lot more today than you did last time. She's like, you were a lot more honest. And I'm like, you were ready for it. I
Right.
was like, we can only meet, whether it's me and you or friends or family, we can only meet people where they are.
Right.
So if a friend reaches out for help, or if someone reaches out to me, it's that, okay, they're ready for something. They're ready for the truth.
Right. Oh, okay. I could continue there, but before we move on to the twin flame, can we go in? Because I really got a lot from that episode on emotional intelligence. And I sent
Mhm.
it to friends who I know are parents, because it made me, as a mom, do I ask, how she's feeling and have her express her feelings? And, as a parent, I actually coach teens and have parenting and
Oh,
teen
amazing.
classes, and I go to little schools and teach them their little, little tools that I think are so important,
Mhm.
as you are raised. But tell me that. Explain that, because I really learned, it really affected me, because that day I picked up Presley from school and I was like, something happened. How did that make you feel? Like
Yep. And it sounds so cliche. So that podcast episode that you mentioned about the emotional availability, it was really birthed because there's so many times when I talk with clients and I'll ask them whether it's about their karmic or their soulmate or moving on from a relationship. I'm like, well, how did that make you feel? How did you feel when you were with that person? And there was no words. They couldn't describe it. And they might be like, oh, it didn't feel good, or and it's like that. Oh, I guess I was happy. It's just very unsure of what they were feeling. And in that, if we're not sure of what we're feeling, we can't prioritize our feelings, which is really essential for this entire path of growth. And so I started saying, okay, rather than worrying about all the big things just yet, let's kind of get down to what does that emotional intelligence and availability look like? Because especially as women, so many of us will continue to attract the emotionally unavailable man, never having any idea that we're actually the ones that are unavailable, because we're hurt. We don't want to be vulnerable. We're scared. And so I would always have clients begin with the feelings chart, which I'm sure in your work with children, you're very familiar with. And for them, the idea was to kind of pick out 3 feelings that they felt weekly or daily, however they felt like doing it, and what triggered those feelings. And the purpose of that is that, again, talking about generational differences, our grandparents and grandparents stayed in their soulmate relationship, most of them.
Mhm.
Because of that, and because of just coming over, let's say newly to the country or still trying to get established with their businesses, there wasn't really that importance placed on our emotional development. There wasn't someone asking us how we felt. It was very product based or achievement based of how, if we were even asked how school was today,
Right.
it was, did you do good? Did you listen? Did you do well on your test? Were you nice? And so it created a whole generation of all of us where we're just looking for someone to tell us that we did good. We're looking for the product. We're basing ourselves on the achievements without actually leaning in and being like, okay, so you had a bad day at school. And like what you had just said, well, how did you feel about that?
Right.
So rather than as parents or even with our spouses or friends, instead of judging it and saying, oh, well, you'll just do better next time, which is dismissive, or saying, well, you really could have done better. You should have done better. It's really just asking, well, how did you feel about that? And yes, that is what I do with my own girls
You
so
do?
much
That was
so.
my next
Yeah,
question. You
no,
read me
I
mind.
do it. And, they've also become very accustomed to this talk. So, I mean, there was times where they would get into an argument and I would be hearing my older daughter tell my younger daughter, well, you really triggered me when you raised your voice because it made me feel. And I was like, oh my gosh.
I love it.
I'm like, it's just the emotional intelligence that all of us are developing as we are also raising small humans at the same time.
Right. Do
And
you,
so it really is as simple as, instead of saying you'll do better or trying to fix a situation, whomever, children, friend, or otherwise, well, how did you feel? That's it. Now,
right.
now we're asking them to go deeper into their emotional intelligence, start to develop it, give them pause to say, well, how did I actually feel about that? And then we're having a completely different type of conversation.
Right. Yeah, I love that. That is something I will take for my, you know, for life. It really struck a chord with me. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you.
Y-
And even that, I mean, that's really kind of the basis for that next twin flame relationship, because we're not going to approach that and be judgmental of one another or be product or achievement based. And so that emotional intelligence ends up being kind of a key part of being able to attract and keep building, as you know, with your husband, that third love.
Right. Yeah. So going into the twin flame, because we need to get into the stars and the moon and all that too. The
There's so
astrology
much.
part of this book, which is so opening up my eyes about like everything about my life has opened from understanding this astrology part in the wow. So going into the twin flame, and when you talk about triggers, or it's so cute that she uses those words, because I'll sit and I'm at the place, we've been married for, it'll be 20 years in next year. So
Wonderful.
basically the whole lifespan of Paige, like we
Mhm.
got married and then we got pregnant because we were older, right?
Yep.
And so, it's like we have had children from really the beginning of our relationship,
Yeah. Your entire relationship.
our whole relationship. But so your book made me reflect back on that. And I remember like my growth for sure in the last like, 10 years, 5, 10 years has been, I've really focused on my growth, right? And the triggers and everything. So the girls will say, I can't believe that doesn't bug you when dad does that. And because I don't, it doesn't. And
Mhm.
people will ask me like, Ashley, why are you so calm about anything? And that kind of goes with anything in my life, like with any relationship. I'm like, well, that's
Mhm.
their journey. Like like, it doesn't affect me. And I know if it was in me, it would, right? Like it
Oh,
would have triggered.
absolutely.
So I understand that. But when the girls are like, Mom, I said, honey, it's like, that's not even in my radar. Like he is who he is. But that's when I said, oh my gosh, I'm in my soft era.
That is, and it's so funny that you had mentioned that, because my youngest daughter is 12. She's in seventh grade. And every time her friends come over, they're like, how do you stay so calm? And it's like, there's not a lot actually worth getting all that upset about. Anything can be talked and figured out.
Right.
And usually if we all get upset and loud and all over the place, which we're human, so we all tend to do at times, but we're not really resolving anything either.
Right.
So it is, being in that place of growth also means we're not necessarily feeling the triggers in the same way, because we're able, one, to realize, what is most important. We're able to recognize the trigger and then choose to react differently. So let's say even if something did bother us, rather than, snapping at someone, it's just in our head. It's who they are. Does it
Right.
really matter? Does it matter?
Exactly. I love living that way. And I can
Mhm.
see, like, I looked back after I was in your book, thinking of, reflecting back with Richard. And I'm like, oh gosh, I remember when that used to bug me, And I'm like, oh my gosh, he could do that 10 times right now. It wouldn't even hit nothing. It would not hit a nerve. And
No.
in an authentic way. Like I am completely, that does not even affect me. And I love it. And it's so, um, You've just like given me so much like, oh my gosh, I made it past the third door or whatever.
You did. And it is. And even just saying that that's where you experience the majority of your growth. That's usually how you also know that that is a part of your third love or your twin flame, is that not only are you in this relationship where you're both receiving, you both fully accept one another, but both people are able to continue to grow into whatever they determine as their best self. No one's telling you that you have to grow or change, but it's just the love and the connection itself continues to foster that.
Right. You quoted the prophet, right?
I quoted the
Yes.
prophet. Yep,
Yes.
I
And I
did.
love that book.
I do too.
And I remember like I was walking the dogs this morning when I was at that place and wherever I was listening to it on one of your podcasts, and you're reading it. And it was like, when you see two pillars, you know,
Yes.
oh, I
Yep. The
just,
one about space and our
yes.
togetherness.
And
Yes.
that's how Richard and I are. It's like he lives on his pillar. I live
Yep.
on mine. We promote and celebrate the pillars and encourage and
But
all the
you're each
things.
strong in your own
Right.
identity, your own selves, and your lives. Versus, let's say, if it was the karmic, it would be one pillar, it would be
Right.
one tree. People would be so enmeshed within each other that they couldn't separate. So having that, and I love the prophet. And so that is my favorite saying. It's like, let there be space in your togetherness. It's longer as far as the pillars and, drink not from the same cup and all of that, but just letting there be space in your togetherness. And that's also the twin flame, because the soulmate is the traditional, what we're supposed to do. So there tends to be little space in that relationship. We're doing all of the things that we should be doing together. And in the karmic, there's no space whatsoever, because of course we feel like we're going to cease to breathe without this individual. And then in the third love, that twin flame, I've heard all sorts of stories. I know twin flames who are absolutely married, but they have separate residences. They have, of course, spend evenings and such together, but they like their own space.
Hmm.
People who have their own bedrooms, twin flames, absolutely content and happy with that. People who realize that they want to be together and they're very committed, but they're going to wait to move in until, let's say, after children are grown. So there's so many different situations, but having that space in our togetherness and being more than okay with it, really excelling from it, is really only kind of what's possible in that third love.
Right. What other thing just came to my mind is I think the children, or I know that the children are being born in this higher vibration and a different, I mean, their
Yes.
DNA is completely
Mm-hmm.
different than when we were born, right? Or when our parent, I mean, it's like we've all evolved. Will their
Absolutely.
time in a soul, where their time in each uh, little department of relationships that you described, the three loves, will it become less and less and more into that?
That's what I'm wondering. I mean, as far as, let's say, our generation would be responsible, let's say, hopefully, for being a lot of that generational healing, would for being accomplished in that. If that was the case, then no matter how amazing parents we are or try to be, our children are still going to accumulate some sort of wound or experience that they're going to have to heal from. But especially with seeing already that progression of certain generations that are older having remained with their soulmate, and now very few people remaining with their soulmate, I'm even wondering if that's going to end up actually even being a necessity at all for, let's say, our children and their
Right.
children, because there's going to be no sort of stigma. Let's say, for the most part, I'm sure there's still going to be, different areas across the world where they still might have to, but for the most part, people are no longer going to have to marry someone that they think their family will approve of or that they think fits a certain mold. So it'll be interesting to see. But even the karmic relationship, I mean, whether you share that your daughter Paige just went off, and my Emma is a senior in high school this year, so we're very close on that cusp. But even talking with her and her friends, the lingo that they have of him, a man not being fully available for them or not being consistent, and they have the language that I know many women in their 30s are just starting to develop. So even these karmic relationships, I'm sure they're going to have to go through something to heal. But I don't believe, with the language and the vibration that they're born with right now, that it's going to be, that we're going to be talking 20 years or even 10 years for
Right.
them.
Paige, oh gosh, her advice to her sister before she went to college was,
Oh
so
gosh.
there's 3 years difference, right? You don't need a boyfriend at all in high school. Maybe your senior year, you could find someone that's nice to go to prom with. And then you don't even need any boyfriends in college. It's just a waste of time. You can have friends, whatever, but wait till you're in your 20s. And then, but I was listening to her. Presley's like, geez, Paige, what if I do like a boy? And she goes, no, it's a waste of time. They're just too young. They're not even ready for that. Just wait, just have fun and
Uh-huh.
wait till you're old. But that was her advice. And I was like, wow. But
Yeah.
yeah, so
Nope.
she's,
And it's funny because actually my eldest says the same thing to my youngest too.
oh, good.
So she says very similar things and it's like, but it's very different generational. It's very different in how they're being raised now, especially our daughters, with being able to advocate for their truth, being able to say what they're feeling, being able to say if a boundary is crossed. And we're talking about them learning this in their teens and early 20s versus all of us who 30s and
Oh,
beyond 60s. I have, my eldest client was in her mid 70s
oh,
that I've
wow.
spoken with. So these are lessons that they're learning so much younger. And even that aspect of, let's say, really what your daughter was saying is to choose yourself,
Right.
enjoy your
Yes.
life, do well on what you want to do at school, have fun with your athletics. Don't worry about it right now.
Right.
And in all reality, choosing ourselves is something that is important no matter how old we are.
Oh, I've only had a week of her in school and I've watched her choose herself. And I'm
Oh,
just in like the most proudest thing. I can't even explain these texts that I'll get or phone calls. And I'm like, what? And I get off and I tell Richard, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just had the most proud mom moment. And
oh,
it's only been a week. We're in week, but it's like, wow, I'm just so, and Richard too, he's like, gosh, I've really she's exceeded what I even thought would be even in a year, in a week. And it's true. It's so amazing to watch. And you think you're planting that you're hoping that you're planting seeds this whole,
yes.
childhood, but you
Yep. Oh,
don't know
absolutely.
anything until
You
now.
don't know what's going to take root
No.
until they actually leave. I tell my mom all the time, like, I'm just planting seeds. We'll see
Yep.
what happens later.
Oh, okay. Let's go and we could talk all that. I would love another podcast about how you parent. Okay,
Yes.
so let's talk about how you came into this new book, Written in the Stars, about and adding astrology to the mix. And you
Yes.
go
So,
to where you want to go because I don't know anything about the south nodes and the north nodes. I've been reading it and the elements and all these things.
yes. So I always, that was one of the things when I spoke about kind of being different when I was a child, is I have always loved astrology. I used to read my mother's astrology books, I think, before I even knew really what I was reading. And I wrote the first ever astrology article for Elephant Journal years and years ago, and I loved it. And it felt so good to write it. And people responded and were so grateful that it became more of something that I did on a regular basis. And then after You Only Fall in Love Three Times, where I talk about the three different types of love, everyone was asking me, the number one question I got from people is, but how do you know which one you're in? You and I can sit here on the other side of a lot of this and say, well, you would never think that your soulmate is your karmic. And why would you ever consider that your karmic was your twin flame? But when you're in it
Hmm.
and you're having that chemistry, you're being triggered, you're scared of your truth, all of those feelings, it's normal. People have, because to admit which relationship we're in also then brings about the necessity for change. So until we're ready to embrace change, we will tend to not be able to accept whatever truth it is about the relationship. But people tend to like things as clear and simple as possible, which is usually right in front of them, right? Like it's written on the wall, we can't ignore it.
Right.
And so I started looking, and thankfully, so many clients and everybody that I know, even people I would like text while reading the book, and I'm like, "Can I have your birth information? I just want to check something." And everyone gave me their birth information, and so I started to see and then test out different astrological transits that really correlated to the relationship. So if people were questioning and wondering which relationship I'm in, all they really have to do is read Written in the Stars. And that's why I kind of love the nickname. As someone said, that it is like a cheat sheet for relationships. You still have to make your own choices, but it
Right.
will definitely tell you where to go. And so in this, I was able to discover and say, okay, if people are in a soulmate relationship, Saturn ends up becoming incredibly important. Saturn, it's actually clear as day, kind of the easiest thing to identify if you are in a soulmate relationship. If you are in a karmic relationship, then again, that's where you start bringing in your parents' astrology. And so there's the blank charts to fill in throughout the book, where you can have your parents' astrology, yours, past romantic partners. And if you start seeing, let's say, like your dad's Venus as all of these romantic partner Venus, then it's like saying, okay, did I really feel loved by my dad? If you start seeing a lot of like that South Node energy, which is where, which is kind of the place of where that generational karma, karmic lessons, kind of known as the place of the soul's undoing, which is a beautiful name for the painful lessons that we have to go through. If we start seeing like South Node represented, we know, okay, it's a different type of karmic relationship. And so the goal with this book was, all right, first and foremost, how can I give people that, right in front of them, hands-on evidence for whatever relationship they're in for when they're ready for it. But then it also went more deeply into, like you had mentioned, like what's your leading element? And kind of being able to learn more about ourselves, about the archetypes of how, yes, we have three relationships, but that the soulmate is also very similar to that inner child. The karmic is very similar to the teenager. And that third love is also, very connected to kind of being in that healing adult phase. So that ultimately people, it's not about hating what shaped who we are or seeing certain relationships as mistake or even divorce as mistake, but understanding and realizing that everything, you came here with the purpose not only of this love, this amazing third love that was destined for you, but also all the experiences that came before it, including any of those painful ones in childhood.
Right. Explain. So when I remember you just made this I remember this, I forgot, but I had like 3 to 4 boyfriends in a row. I were pretty close together that had my dad's same birthday. And I remember meeting them and
No
going,
way.
yes. And I
Really?
go, your birthday's what? I go, oh my gosh, dad, he has the same birthday. It happened for at least 4 times and they were boyfriends. Like it wasn't just
Yeah.
and what was that? Does that mean anything?
Oh, it 100% means anything. And it's great. I always say it's really great, like when the universe makes it as easy as possible. So usually in those cases, it's like automatically, and I've seen it like one person would have it be, the same birthday or like the same month, but having the same birthday is really incredible. It basically is the universe being like, look at your father. What's the relationship like with your father? What's the relationship like when you were younger? What relationship did you see? But especially having it be so clear. And again, something that I always say to people is that I get on the phone with them, and usually I'll have kind of collected all the information ahead of time. And I say, okay, I'm going to ask a few questions, get background information just so I can tell you why this is causing X, Y, or Z in your relationship. And so I always ask, how was your childhood? And actually, the majority of people say, it was great. My childhood was wonderful. I loved my parents and they loved me. Of that percentage, everybody's like, well, dad left when I was 12, or mom had a lot of mental health issues. So I really took care of the house. So it's also being okay with two simultaneous truths being possible. We can have had a good childhood, whatever good we
Right.
determine that is. We can love our parents. They can love us. They can be good people. Absolutely. But it doesn't mean that we still don't have things to heal from. I still tell my daughters, I'm like, you're going to have to heal from wounds from me. I can't tell you what they are, but you're going to have to. There's going to be something there, no matter who we are or what we do. And so being okay with saying, okay, I love my parents. They're good people, but I went through these experiences, or perhaps this relationship shaped the way I view men, or however it might be, that ends up becoming important to the journey. So if anybody else is out there and they're dating partners that have the same birthdays as one of the parents, it's just the universe saying, look at what the relationship is with that parent in a very
Right.
clear way.
And then my ex-husband for a year, we had the same birthday.
Really? Same year and everything?
No,
Okay,
just the
different
same.
years, but
Yeah.
same birthday.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Forgot
So
about that
again,
until now.
depending on like the Saturn sign, for each of you, let's say, but it's also really attracting, not just, I would say, in that relationship, then it probably wasn't just about childhood aspects. It was probably a lot connected with your own truth as well. Were you listening to yourself in that relationship? Were you following your intuition? Were you making sure that your needs were being met, or was it all about them?
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
totally.
That's
Bullseye.
well, and that's what I think is so fascinating about it, because again, it's astrology, and not everybody is accustomed to it. And I try to explain everything in kind of, as I always do, the most simplest way possible. but the idea is that we don't have to talk about some convoluted, complicated things. It's more or less, like what is the sign next to Venus if you look it up online, like at, say, a website to look up your birth chart. And it's really just about understanding yourself more so that we're not judging what we've been through. We're not replaying that story over and over in our head of like, oh, but why did you choose that guy? You're so stupid. Why did you do that? It's instead realizing, oh, okay, I did this. And wait a minute, everybody else actually does this too. It's not just me. And being able to practice more self love, which is really the key to get out of our karmic, to be able to have the courage to leave our soulmate and to attract that twin flame.
Your attachment style is usually the way you describe love.
Yes.
So, what is your attachment style?
My attachment style now is secure. However, I say, like anything, is that I am a recovering anxious one. I am almost that recovering codependent. I say, like so many things, it's not, once we heal them, it's not something that just goes away. It's not any childhood wounds or even an unavoidant or anxious or disorganized attachment. It's not just a matter of it all disappearing. It's a matter of, are we going to react differently? So like I tell everyone, I will always be aware of that aspect, to become anxious, to check in. Well, why haven't I heard from them? What's really going on? Have their feelings changed? Or that codependent of, let me give all of myself and you don't have to give anything and I will do it. I'll take care of it. So by being aware of that, that's really what for me has allowed me to become more secure at this space. And it can do the same for any of us.
So, but you've raised your daughters single, right?
Yes, I have.
For their whole life.
Their entire lives. Yes. My youngest was about a year. And so now she's 12. So 11 years.
And then, so do you date during that time?
I do date, creatively date, because obviously there is not a huge amount of time when you're not with your children. But I have been able to date. I've been able to remain open, put myself out there, be able to have a karmic relationship after my divorce, was able to reconnect with that third love. But I'm not out every day by any means. I'm home at my
Right.
house now, and I'll be helping my daughter with her homework as best I can when we
Right.
finish.
But I mean, as a dater, like as
Mhm.
someone out there in the world dating with your knowledge and background, do you how do you are you sitting there like, okay, what is this guy mirroring with
Yes.
me?
Oh, absolutely. I do that all the time. And even, if something happens and let's say it's like crashed wires or mixed signals, I ask myself, I'm like, why, what is happening? Like, what am I doing that's attracting that? And that was really that aha moment that I had with my karmic relationship. And that was in the book as well. I had literally just dropped my daughter off at lacrosse practice and I was sitting there and all of a sudden I started connecting the dots. And I actually made the choice to look at myself the way that I would someone that I speak with.
Hmm.
So removing, which again is what we say is so much of that hard space of being able to see it when you're in it. And so I was like, okay, I'm just looking at this and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. And having that awareness and realization, because I don't want to just continue my own journey, but again, talking as parents and wanting to be consistent and stable and wanting to hopefully teach our daughters what they're worth receiving. So
Right.
I always, and I tell people, I never suggest anything to others that I haven't or wouldn't do myself.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I've just loved this so much more than I even thought I would. I knew I would,
Oh,
but it's
I
like,
love
oh,
that.
it's
I
even
know.
better. I can't wait for people to meet you. Oh, tell everybody how to find you and get your books. It's not out yet though, right? As of
Nope.
now, as of
It
this
comes
date.
it comes out on Wednesday the 11th.
Okay.
And you can find me at wordsofkaterose.com or on Instagram, Words of Kate Rose, same thing on Facebook, or as you mentioned, Soul Gold on Apple or Spotify podcasts.
Yeah. Is that new kind of? Did you
It
just?
is. It's in
Yeah.
May. And that's one of those things where I had it. I'm like, it was like the universe like kept tapping me on the shoulder, like, you need to do this, you need to do, and finally I was like, okay, we're just gonna start.
Oh, that was one of my magic moments. It 4 years ago, almost five. I had that same thing. And that's when I
Yep.
always say yes to that, even if you
Yes.
don't know if it's going to get you anywhere. And I can't,
You
I'm in love with it. Like
No,
I
you
would
have
never
to.
have known
And
that.
I already got the validation from the writing that you just do it. You don't wait to see if it's perfect. You can even hear, if you listen to my first two episodes, I hadn't been able to figure out how to get the mic working. And
Right.
it took me, I think, like the third, but it's just begin where you are. It doesn't have to be
Exactly.
perfect. You don't have to know how it's all going to turn out. Just begin where you are because it's important.
Right. I look back at the beginning, I can barely listen to myself talk because I would read the intro, I would type it out and read it. And I'm like, I can hear my words, like I can even hear the paper turn. I was like, oh, Ash, but
But
yeah,
no,
I went where I was and it's all good.
and you
People
were
will
meant
say,
to
wow,
start exactly in
you've
that
really
way.
evolved. I'm like, thank you. What
Oh,
does
that's
that mean?
wonderful though. Well, we should all evolve. That's the whole point of this is
Right.
that we're never going to reach a point of being healed. We're never going to reach a point of being done with our journey. We are always in a state of growth, of healing, of evolving and hopefully becoming better along the way.
Perfect. That was a perfect way to end this beautiful conversation.
Ah,
Thank you. Thank you. Now we will
well,
go
thank
tend to our daughters. Well, my
yes.
daughter, you get
My
two
daughters
still.
as well.
You still get to say, I mean, I have two, but
Yeah.
not one in the house is a little hard to say, but I'm working toward that acceptance and it's good. We're all
Well, thank
growing.
you
She's
so
got to grow,
much.
right?
Yes, I know. We are, and I'll be right there with you next year.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Ashley.
You're so welcome.